Let's go on to core ophthalmology, and this is vitreoretinal interface disorders course. So it's an instruction course. So the speakers are going to be Dr. Dharmesh on macular hole, Dr. Vikram, and Dr. Jaideep Walinchkar, as well as our panelist, Dr. Amol and Dr. Chinmay. Amol, how are you?
I'm great. How are you all?
Excellent, excellent. So let's go.
Yeah,
so
good to see you all.
Hi, Dr. Amol. Hi, Jaideep. Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Hello.
Nice to have you.
Thanks a lot. So we have no financial interest, and in this there will be some off-label use of intravitreal triamcinolone and intravitreal brilliant blue. So what is vitreoretinal interface anatomy? First, most important is posterior cortical vitreous, which is mainly collagen type 2, along with hyaluronic acid, glycoproteins, and the most important part another is internal limiting membrane, mainly collagen type 4 and laminin, fibronectin, and proteoglycans. So this is one video which I have taken from actually YouTube. The source is mentioned below, and we can see the vitreous, the aqueous is in front, the vitreous body. So this is the main vitreous body. This is the vitreous cortex. This is the anterior surface. The vitreous base is one of the strongest attachment of vitreous. We all know that. The other important attachments are at the optic disc, the parafoveal area. So this is the cloquet canal, is the actually embryological structure wherein the blood vessels supply the blood supply and then they regress.
Now, let's take advantage of our ability to make vacuums to show what the vitreous would look like if it was dissected free from the back of the eye. I have left it attached in front of the eye.
So this anatomy is very, very important in understanding vitreomacular interface disorder. So this is the main vitreous cortex, and all our surgeons will be dealing with the vitreous cortex and the interface between the cortical vitreous and the internal limiting membrane. So we can see where the cloquet canal is missing. This is the attachment. Now if we go into biochemistry, these are the collagen fibers that are seen. In a young patient, these are all transparent and the vitreous cortex is attached to the ILM. If we zoom in and look at the collagen, we can see that these collagen fibers are structures and then there are cross-linking between two collagen fibers. So this is very well interspersed and that gives clarity, and we can see hyaluronan going around the collagen. So this anatomy of vitreous is very important because newer drugs are coming up which can help us in treating vitreomacular interface disorders. And as we age, this anatomy, this biochemistry of the collagen fibers and other structures starts to change. So temporal changes. So this is liquefaction of the vitreous and increasing liquefaction. As age increases and in some pathological diseases, we can see. So we can see that the distance between the collagen fibrils changes and they start to form clumps initially, which gives rise to vitreous floaters. And As we age, this number of floaters keep on increasing. So we can see the number of floaters has increased. And this is associated with vitreoretinal interface disorders. So the patients have symptoms like light flashes, new floater formation, and loss of vision sometimes. And one of the most important anatomical and physiological change which occurs with age at the vitreoretinal interface disorder is the separation of cortical vitreous, which is called as posterior vitreous detachment. So we can see that the liquefied vitreous starts to seep and separation of cortical vitreous occurs. But it is attached at the optic nerve head and at the fovea. So this separation begins around the fovea. The vitreoretinal interface disorders that we are going to study. Sometimes if it is natural, then it keeps on progressing and is attached only at the optic disc initially, and then also separates from the optic disc. And then the patient will have the typical symptom, and we can see the V's ring on clinical examination. So this is the usual course of posterior vitreous detachment. We can see young cortical vitreous attached, then perifoveal separation. In a normal state, the fovea separates, optic disc remains attached, and ultimately the optic disc also separates. So this is some other thing like. So vitreoretinal interface disorders can be listed as vitreomacular traction syndrome, idiopathic macular hole, lamellar macular hole, epiretinal membrane, even myopic traction maculopathy, interface disorders in PDR, age-related macular degeneration, and other interface disorders like the retinal tears and other such things. So vitreous gel liquefaction and weakening of the vitreoretinal adhesion that we saw in this video, wonderfully demonstrated, cause complete PVD, and liquefaction results in the mismatch and causing of anomalous PVD. So in retinal periphery, this results in vitreomacular interface disorders of tears and detachment. At the macula, VMT, macular hole, ERM, and other changes related to diabetic macular edema. And at the optic disc, we can have vitreopapillary traction. So OCT is now one of the most important diagnostic tools to help us in determining the vitreoretinal interface disorders. The most important thing is that we should not restrict ourselves to single photograph that the patient sends us on WhatsApp. We should go through the whole OCT scan. OCT itself has now classified it as vitreomacular adhesion, vitreomacular traction, and full thickness macular hole. So by the vitreomacular traction study classification system. Most eyes have a complete adhesion at birth, and vitreomacular adhesion is a normal state, but slowly it starts to separate. So partial PVD, then persistent vitreous attachment to the fovea, then acute angle between the posterior hyaloid and the inner retinal surface, absence of changes, and then macular hole formation. So here we can see there is only foveal adhesion. Here we can see there is a broad-based macular adhesion. So the correlation is stage 0 of original GAS classification and international classification system. So epiretinal membrane, there are other things which is a macular pseudo hole and a lamellar macular hole. So lamellar macular hole is the spontaneous rupture of the inner wall of the large central cystoid space to form a lamellar hole in one major complication of the cystoid macular edema. Whereas spontaneous contraction of an epiretinal membrane that surrounds but does not cover the foveolar area may produce a biomicroscopic appearance simulating a full thickness macular hole, but it is not a full thickness macular hole. So this is a lamellar macular hole. Management, the general principles are the same. A vitrectomy, separation of the hyaloid is done. So we usually triamcinolone acetonide to stain, and then we induce a posterior vitreous detachment, followed by internal limiting membrane peeling. And in some cases, we can do a vitrectomy with an epiretinal membrane peeling, depending on. So gentle posterior hyaloid separation and careful ILM peeling, as our surgeon team will describe, is the most important thing in the management. Thank you. Over to you, Dharmesh. We'll go through the talks and then we will cover the questions. What do you say?
Yeah, same. That's great. So
I will stop sharing.
yeah, you just stop sharing. I'll start.
Yeah, I've stopped.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And thanks, Anirudh and MOS for inviting and being part of this instruction course. As a macular hole, we know it's a very common thing. It's easily diagnosed on fundus photography. Every day we see in our practice. And with the help of OCT, it's become the very simple thing. First described by Knapp and just a minute. Yeah, it's first described by Knapp and Noyes in 1869 and 70, and term was coined by Ogilvie in 1900. But the factors for inciting macular hole is a vitreous synersis, posterior vitreous separation, cystoid macular edema, traumatic blunt injury, or high myopia. One more hydration theory was proposed by Tornambe, and he says the perifoveal traction with the hydration of the edges of the macular hole causes the breach to expand more and increase in the size of the hole. Now, incidence is 0.05%, more in the female. Lack of estrogen is being suggested, and bilateral in 3 to 22% of the cases. Now, this is the gas classification. Donald gases work too much, and this is all given before the OCT has come. So this is stage 1A, 1B, 2, and stage 3, and stage 4. So how he has described is stage 1 is the localized shrinkage of the prefoveal cortical vitreous and the tractional shallow detachment of the foveola. But there is a lack of the Watzke sign, and then the light reflex is just foveolar depression is gone. And stage 1 is a small yellow spot, that is 250-300 micron. And 1B is a foveal detachment and yellow halo forms. So this is stage 1. And stage 2 is a minute hole from the near the center, and it's a detached fovea. There is not inevitable process. 50% of the cases, there is a vitreofoveal attachment spontaneously. That's the stage 2. In stage 3, there is a full thickness macular hole greater than 450, but no posterior vitreous separation. And this is the common presentation in the clinic we have seen. And this has the positive Watzke sign and some fluid or the cystoid changes at the margin of the macular hole. And this is the stage 3 we see. But we can see here on the OCT there is an operculum. And in stage 4 there is a full thickness macular hole with posterior vitreous detachment. So there is a total PVD, and then the full thickness macular hole is stage 4. Now this International Vitreomacular Traction Study Group has again reclassified after the OCT has invented, and there's a lots of thing on vitreomacular adhesion, vitreomacular traction, and so many things came. And then we again OCT derived anatomical findings and the classification was proposed. So now OCT based VMA is already being discussed by Dr. Anirudh. It's like cortical vitreous above the retinal surfaces and vitreous remaining attached within a 3 millimeter radius of fovea without retinal abnormality. That can be focal, that is 1500 micron, or a broad more than 1500 micron. And vitreomacular traction criteria about OCT is the perifoveal vitreous cortex detachment from the retinal surface, macular attachment of the vitreous cortex within 3 millimeter radius of the fovea, and association of attachment with distortion of the foveal surfaces, intraretinal structural changes, elevation of fovea above the RP, or a combined thereof the factors. Now VMT can be subclassified into focal or a broad depending on the width of the vitreous attachment, and can be generalized thinking for the macular vascular leakage on FFA, SCISIS, or the CME, where a focal area shows the distort foveal surfaces, elevate the foveal floor pseudocyst formation in the central macula. ERM formation is always seen as the residual vitreous remain on the surface of retina after the PVD, and that's called vitreous schisis, and then later on that forms the epiretinal membrane. Now, full thickness macular hole classification based on the OCT is as per the size of the hole, presence or absence of the vitreomacular traction, and the cause. So aperture size is being diagnosed as 250 micron, 250 to 400 micron, and more than 400 micron. So they are usually macular hole. It's concurrent with the vitreomacular traction associated. Then only they can be tried for the pharmacological vitreolysis. It can be again diagnosed between the primary or secondary full thickness macular hole. Primary is idiopathic. Secondary can be blunt trauma, lightning strike, high myopia, macular schisis, wet AMD after the anti-VEGF. So here we measure the aperture size on the OCT and we can small, medium or large classification done, and along with the vitreomacular traction or the posterior vitreous status can be diagnosed on the OCT. Now there is a comparison of the chart where as per the first classification of the gas classification of 1 to 4 stage, and here is the vitreomacular adhesion traction, small, medium, large, full thickness macular hole with or without the vitreomacular tractions. Now impending macular hole is the case which full thickness macular hole in one eye and vitreomacular traction on the OCT in fellow eye. And VMA in a fellow eye has been referred to as the stage 0 macular hole. Now lamellar macular hole is the irregular foveal contour defect in the inner fovea, schisis, and typically between OPL and OLN and the intact photoreceptor layers. And that can be seen in a cataract surgery, myopia, uveitis, AMD or RD, and the treatment is always a controversial. Pseudohole can be diagnosed on the OCT with the hip foveal edges along with the ERM, steep macular contour, but no loss of the retinal tissue. Now pseudohole can be of the two types, either tractional or degenerative types, and both can be easily diagnosed on the OCT, where here we can see there is the cyst changes formation with the elevated surface. So this is the traction. Watsky-Allen signs can be used for the diagnosis. Management is surgery, vitrectomy with ILM peeling, SF6 gas and a prone position, initially for 2 or 3 days, more importantly first 24 hours. Larger holes require inverted flap technique. Failed surgery may require amniotic membrane graft and retinal patch graft. A small surgery, we usually do different method of ILM peeling. I'll just show you the pinch and peel of the picking the edge of ILM. And once we get the edge of ILM peeling can be done completely and in circumferential manner. We remove the ILM. All sutureless 23, 25, 27 gauge vitrectomies can be done for macular hole. And once the ILM peeling is done, FGE and the gas injection is performed. So once we complete the circumferential ILM peeling, fluid gas exchange done and SF6 is injected. Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
That was really wonderful, Dr. Dharmesh. I think then we'll go on to next speaker and then take on any questions or discussion later on. Is that fine? Yeah, over to you, Dr. Vikram. Can you share your screen? You are mute, Dr. Vikram.
Yeah, just a moment.
Yeah, Dr. Vikram is going to speak on epiretinal membrane.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, yes.
So, good afternoon all. Thanks to Dr. Aniruddha and Moss for allowing me to be a part of this IC. So, I'll be talking on epiretinal membrane. It will be more of a theoretical presentation. Epiretinal membrane is a term used to describe a semi-translucent membrane, a fibrocellular tissue, proliferating on the surface of the internal limiting membrane. Epimacular membrane, macular pucker, and premacular fibrosis are the various terms used to describe this condition. The variety of these names given to this disorder reflects the wide spectrum of presentation, and the clinical findings may range from benign asymptomatic disorder to debilitating metamorphosia and central visual loss. It was first described by Ivanov in 1865. Evidence regarding the epidemiology predominantly comes from two large studies, the Beaver Dam Eye Study and the Blue Mountain Eye Study. The prevalence overall was found to be 7 to 11.8% with a 5-year incidence of 5.3%. And the idiopathic ARMs were bilateral in 19.5 to 31%, with a 5-year incidence of second eye involvement of 13.5%. Seeing the Indian scenario, the overall prevalence of ARM in Asian Indians was found to be 7.6%. The ARM is basically classified into 3 categories with no associated ocular abnormality, is termed as idiopathic or the primary ARMs. With any associated ocular abnormalities termed as secondary, in which the causes could be retinal vascular disease, any trauma, retinal detachments, or any intraocular inflammation. And iatrogenic if they occur following any medical or surgical intervention, as in post-operative after cataract or RD surgery or retinal lasers. A clinical grading was proposed by Glass to describe the different stages of the disease. In grade 0, also termed as cellophane maculopathy, a translucent membrane is seen with no underlying retinal distortion. These membranes are often asymptomatic and they are usually an incidental finding during a routine examination. Grade 1 epiretinal membrane is associated with irregular wrinkling of the inner retina. When this involves the fovea, the patient often complains of distorted vision or blurred vision. The other symptoms that the patient may complain are loss of binocularity, central photopsia, and macropsia. Eccentric grade 1 ARM that do not involve the fovea are usually asymptomatic. A grade 2 ARM is characterized by an opaque membrane which causing obscuration of the underlying vessels with marked full thickness retinal distortion and vascular tortuosity. The patient may complain of distorted vision and metamorphopsia. ARMs with full thickness retinal distortion may also be associated with cotton wool spots, exudates, blood hemorrhages, and microaneurysms. Cystoid macular edema is seen in 20 to 40% of the patients. Moving on to the pathogenesis, the initiating event or the factors responsible for development of ARM formation have yet to be fully elucidated. However, there is evidence that the ARM formation represents a reactive gliosis in response to retinal injury or disease involving the inflammatory and the glial cells. In general, the ARM have 2 main components, an extracellular matrix consisting of collagen and the cells of retinal and extraretinal origin, such as the glial cells, the RP, and the fibrocytes. The relative abundance of these components within the ARM reflects the underlying etiology. Like in idiopathic ARM, they are mainly composed of glial elements, whereas in ARM secondary to proliferative vitreoretinopathy are more heavily pigmented due to the high RPE content. Similarly, ARMs that develop in response to neovascular proliferation may have a large vascular component. More advanced ARMs have a contractile element that exerts traction on the underlying retina and distort the retinal vasculature. In these membranes, a higher content of myofibroblasts is observed. The diagnostic features, OCT is considered as a diagnostic feature. In OCT macula, an ARM is seen as a hyperreflective layer on the surface of the retina. It may be associated with underlying corrugation of the retinal surface, blunting of the foveal counter, increase in the retinal thickness. The idiopathic ARMs are seen as adherent globally to the underlying retina, whereas secondary ARMs are seen as focal retinal adhesions. Seeing the OCT classification of ARM, it is divided into 4 stages depending on the severity of the retinal damage caused by the ARM. In stage 1, there is a mild ARM with preservation of the foveal depression. Stage 2 shows the foveal depression is lost, but all the retinal layers are easily identified. Stage 3 shows the presence of an ectopic inner foveal layers, which is depicted by white arrows across the foveal flow. The foveal depression is lost, but all the retinal layers remain identifiable. Whereas in stage 4, there is severe alteration in the anatomy with foveal disorganization. The ectopic inner foveal, again shown by white arrows, is present and retinal layers are not identifiable. Despite the advantages of OCT, fluorescein angiography still remains a useful tool, particularly in cases where an underlying retinal vascular event or a choroidal neovascular membrane is suspected. Fluorescein angiography can highlight the extent of retinal wrinkling, degree of retinal vascular tortuosity, and the presence of macular edema. Displacement or distortion of the foveal capillary network may indicate a foveal ectopia. Fundus autofluorescence has demonstrated that retinal vessel displacement may be correlated with the severity of metamorphosia. Focal macular ERG has also been used to predict the post-operative outcomes. Oscillatory potentials, B wave and A wave are all reduced in patients with ERM. A reduced B by A ratio appears to be a sign of an early disease, with the reduction of the A wave amplitude correlated with poor post-op visual acuity. When to offer surgery to the patient and the prognostic indicators. The principal indications for ERM surgery are patient-reported symptoms of reduced visual acuity and metamorphopsia. Although surgery is usually reserved for patients with a reduction in visual acuity of less than 20/60, however, improvement in the surgical techniques have led the patients to undergo surgery with better visual acuity if disturbed by symptoms of metamorphopsia or diplopia or for occupational reasons. There is also evidence that the integrity of the outer retinal structures, the external limiting membrane, the ellipsoid status, and the interdigitation zone status may also have an impact on the post-operative outcome. Both idiopathic and secondary ERMs appear to benefit equal extent from the surgery. However, in some cases, a pre-existing macular pathology may limit the visual recovery. There is also debate whether to peel the ILM or not to peel the ILM. One group proposed that the removal of ILM at the time of surgery removes the scaffold from myofibrous proliferation, thus reducing the risk of recurrence. Conversely, there are concerns that the loss of retinal tissue and damage to the Muller cell foot plates may adversely affect the visual outcome. Thus, in conclusion, understanding the pathogenesis, the factors responsible for ERM formation, and prognostic factors will allow clinicians to make an informed decision whether between continuing a follow-up and appropriate timing for surgical intervention. Thank you.
Thanks, Vikram. That was really wonderful and very elaborate. I think we will go over to Jaideep now. Jaideep, are you there? Dr. Jaideep?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi,
Jaideep.
Mahendra.
Yeah.
Hi.
So
Hi, Jaideep.
over to you,
How are you?
Jaideep.
Hi, Dharmesh.
Start sharing your screen. It's really
Hi,
nice
Dr.
to
Vikram.
see everyone virtually.
Yeah, same here.
With
Same
one
here. Thanks
meeting you
for
are
inviting.
physically. Yeah.
I'll
come on.
share my screen.
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks, Aniruddha, for inviting for this wonderful instruction course, and nice to see everyone. So I think most of the previous speakers have already discussed most of the things which I'm going to speak of, but other than the management part, is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Just a minute. Let me see if my slides are moving. Okay. Is it moving now?
Yeah, it's moving.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we have all discussed about the PVD and the mechanism how most of the vitreoretinal interface disorders occur. So the brief is basically PVD happening, and then these are the steps in which it happens. We all know it separates around the perifoveal region first, and then goes on to separate in the end around the ONH. So this is the basic mechanism where our most of the vitreoretinal interface disorders occur when there is an anomalous PVD. So the progressive liquefaction as well as weakening of the adhesions between the posterior vitreous and the ILM, they lead to the plane detected between the retinal surface and the posterior vitreous cortex, and that is a posterior vitreous detachment. And an anomalous PVD is where the liquefaction occurs faster than the detachment of the vitreous cortex, as well as there are abnormal adhesions between the vitreous cortex and the ILM. So this anomalous PVD can lead to the multiple disorders which we are discussing today. So as my Aniruddha had highlighted, the International Vitreomacular Traction Study Group first highlighted or classified the vitreomacular adhesions on the basis of OCT characteristics, and they defined them as focal or broad. Focal, which is less than 1500 microns, and broad is greater than 1500 microns. So here you can see a simple vitreomacular adhesion without any traction, which is a physiological process before the PVD sets in. And most of the patients are asymptomatic with no retinal changes and no treatment required. So subsequently, when there is an anomalous PVD development with anomalous adhesion, you can have a vitreomacular traction, and sometimes in 10 to 20% of the patients, you can have a spontaneous resolution as well in the 6 months to 2 year period, if you observe them. But then there are patients who have this persistent vitreomacular traction, and they are symptomatic and will need some treatment. So by definition, vitreomacular traction is nothing but excessive traction in the macula from the vitreous that changes the contour of the fovea. symptoms, as Dr. Vikram has also said, that's reduced visual acuity, metamorphopsia. You can have micropsias and photopsias. So all these are the majority of the symptoms the patients present with, and what we see clinically is very difficult to pick up when it comes to vitreomacular traction, unlike the ERMs as well as the macular holes. Here you are not really sure because things are not very clearly visible clinically, but you may find distortion of the fovea, a blunted foveal reflex, sometimes cystic changes, as well as a little bit of SRF subfoveal in severe cases. So in the IVTS classification, what they graded it as grade 1, where there is an incomplete separation of the cortical vitreous with persistent vitreous attachment at the fovea. Grade 2 is grade 1 plus some kind of intraretinal cyst, cleft or schisis formation with VMT with cystic spaces. So that was grade 2. Then comes grade 3, which is grade 2 plus some subretinal fluid resulting from neurosensory elevation of the retina and from the RPE at the fovea. So this was how they graded it in 3 grades. So there are 2 types of traction profile again, which they described. So this is one that is V-shaped. So V-shaped traction is the vitreous cortex detached from the retina on both the temporal and the nasal side of the fovea and attached only at the fovea. And then there is a J-shaped traction, which is only temporal to the fovea, but the nasal side remains attached. So this is important as far as prognostication is concerned, because some studies have shown that the V-shaped traction is having better prognosis compared to the J-shaped after treatment. But recently there was a group which classified or grouped it slightly differently, where this was in Graphe's journal in 2019. So what they proposed is a group A where there is a foveal pseudocyst, which was defined as a formation of a cystoid cavity located in the inner part of the central fovea, along with some foveal thickening. That is group A. Then group B's parafoveal retinoschisis was defined as an intraretinal cyst or clefts, along with no apparent foveal thickening. So no foveal thickening in group B. Group C is outer retinal dehiscence at the fovea, which is sometimes accompanied by foveal thinning. So what they found was that with this classification of VMT, they found that the group A were having favorable outcomes and worse outcomes in group C. So this is about the classification. The other investigations which we can do other than the SD-OCT, which is the most common one which we use, are FFA or OCT angiography and a fundus photo for documentation, but it does not really, because it's 2-dimensional, very difficult to pick up any vitreomacular traction on it, but associated conditions like an ERM or a macular hole can be documented with the fundus photography, serial fundus photography. So I wouldn't go into the details of how the FFA or the OCT angio is going to look in VMT, because here you're not going to see any leakage on the FFA. Unlike the other CME, there might be cystoid spaces. There might be an associated ERM which might stain in the late phases. An OCT angiogram might just show us a few abnormalities in the blood supply. So the preferred practice pattern of the AAO, what they have suggested that the VMT, when it is less than 1500 microns, you can observe it, because some of them, they say 30 to 40% can have spontaneous resolution 1 to 2 years. But if it is more than 1500 microns, you need to intervene. And vitrectomy is the most commonly used modality here. And they have shown at least 2 lines of improvement in most of the patients. So coming to pharmacologic vitreolysis, now this was something which came back way back into 2012. And the one which we heard about and had a lot of excitement about was ocriplasmin, called Jetria by trade name. However, although it was promising in the beginning, it has lost steam now. So what the trials shown that there was significant improvement, statistically significant improvement in patients who were used, but then in which we use this mainly for vitreomacular traction, ERMs, as well as macular hole up to stage 2, early macular holes. But the patient selection criteria was quite stiff and there were side effects. So as a result of this modality has been, not so popular now among the retina specialists. So anyways, it was never marketed in India, so we never had a chance to use it. The second one is gas injection. Again, gas injection itself, just gas injection, has shown some promising results, although there is no randomized clinical trials on it. But in individuals' hands who has experience with it can consider this as an option when you want to, actually treat a vitreomacular traction. Then comes vitrectomy, which is the most commonly used modality. So decision depends on the severity of the patient's symptoms, how much of the daily activities are affected. That is very important to ask. It is an elective procedure, never an emergency. So you need to, weigh the pros and cons and discuss with the patient carefully. When there is a documented worsening, you can consider it. Broad VMTs, you can consider it. When there is a NSD at the macula, poor vision at presentation, all these can lead to decision making for a vitrectomy. So I would just end with my technique where we do a core vitrectomy. You can use any gauge. IVT assisted delineation of posterior vitreous cortex and a gentle PVD induction, preferably start on the nasal side and do gentle PVD induction and then go circumferentially towards the macula rather than directly lifting the PVD over the macula and having disastrous complications like a large FTMH on table. Then you release the vitreomacular traction, do a gentle suction with a gentle suction and a high cut rate, cut the vitreomacular traction without undue traction on the macula. Once you have released it, then complete the peripheral vitrectomy. Then stain the ILM with the dye and negative staining of the ERM if it is present. Peel both the ERM and the ILM if it is present over the macula, and do FG and gas injection. In case of cataract, you can definitely combine significant cataract. You can combine the surgery with cataract surgery because the cataract definitely progresses faster after these surgeries. So to conclude, the OCT has really changed our understanding of the vitreomacular interface as well as the vitreomacular traction syndromes, and it remains a gold standard in these cases. Vitrectomy remains the most commonly performed surgical treatment, but you need to discuss carefully with the patient pros and cons. Although pharmacologic vitreolysis had shown promising results, I think it's not very popular anymore because of its side effects and need for careful case selection and limited success compared to vitrectomy. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
I think that was really a great talk, Dr. Jaideep. And I really appreciate all of our speakers to be very well in time. So we have enough opportunity to have a great discussion. And I open the forum for discussion. Also, Dr. Amol, are you there? So you can join in the discussion. So first, I want to ask to everyone whether how important do you all think is vitreomacular interface disorder to general ophthalmologist? What do you say, Dr. Dharmesh?
Yeah, it's very important, and now with the OCT having available at every centers, they have started doing in many cases and started picking up few subtle things. And for even premium IOL or multifocal or toric IOL, before that, if we are doing the OCTs, we find many subtle ERMs or mild traction, which can be, reason of unhappiness patient after the surgery. So it's something very important thing which we have ignored before and just looking at the macular hole, and many other things we are pointing out as a VMA category.
Yeah, Dr. Vikram, what do you think about the relevance of these epiretinal membranes or such things that you just described? Please unmute yourself before you start talking about these disorders in a routine cataract operation. So if you see a patient with a very thin ERM or a thick ERM, what do you advise the cataract surgeon? Is there any specific guideline or what do you say?
No, as we have already said on our presentation, the gradings of ERM. There are many patients with grade 0 cellophane macular which do not have any symptoms, or an eccentric ERM which do not have any symptoms for the patient. But it is a must for the patient education. What does he have in his eye before going for a cataract surgery? Because later on, over a period of time, say after post cataract surgery, say even after a year, if the ERM progresses, the patient can complain to the doctor that is because of the cataract surgery he has lost his vision. So it is basically about the patient understanding that he already had this problem pre-operatively and which can increase over a period of time. So we need to observe and keep a watch on it. So, and if it increases, then what options we have for it. So I think before a pre-operative, should be considered as a routine thing, as an OCT should be considered?
Yeah, Dr. Amol, from your
Yes.
international experience now, what do you think is the protocol followed by you over there?
In cataract,
Yeah.
if the patient is referred to us with specific complaints like metamorphopsia, maybe not correlating with the cataract, we would go for a OCT. Otherwise, it's not done very routinely out here. And as even Dr. Dharmesh mentioned, maybe unhappy patient post-operatively complaining of maybe a small scotoma or metamorphopsia and not happy with the Snellens, maybe even the general ophthalmologist should be more suspicious, and a retinal surgeon could have a look and do an OCT and find out clinically or with OCT what's going on at the macula. Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Jaideep, if there is a mild vitreomacular traction, do you actually advise undergoing vitrectomy or you advise waiting? Are you there, Jaideep?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah, so mild vitreomacular traction, actually I carefully discuss with the patient how is the vision affecting his day-to-day activities, his or her day-to-day activities, because these patients are, whenever they are a little younger, they have significant symptoms, although there is a mild VMT. So even then, vision might be even 6-9, but they are having significant metamorphopsia or micropsia or, photopsia. So then photophobia. So I discuss with them and tell them that, see, the risk to benefit ratio of doing a surgery is this, and if you are significantly affected, then go for it. This is when I talk to them at first visit. Normally I would, in good vision with a minor VMT, which is a single point VMT, I will not operate. I will probably observe them for 3 to 6 months and look for any documented progression of VMT on the OCT, as well as worsening of symptoms and visual acuity, and then plan it. In case it's a broad-based VMT with already cystoid changes and a neurosensory detachment, I would still go ahead early, even if the vision is reasonably good, because these patients, if you operate early, they do better. Otherwise, they definitely don't, improve if you operate little late.
Yeah. And also in those BMTs which are quite severe, wherein you feel that sometimes if you are going to operate and do a PVD induction, it might lead to conversion into a macular hole. Is there any tip or trick that you will like to share to fellow vitreoretinal surgeons? Now we will focus on a bit of vitreoretinal surgeons, not just anterior segment surgeons. Yeah, Jaideep. Yeah, anyone, Dharmesh.
Right. So
yeah,
so
Jaideep,
the basic thing which I follow is, as I was discussing, the PVD induction has to be very careful in these patients. And if you had an intra-op OCT, I think it would have been great, but most of us don't have those options. So pre-op OCT, you have to carefully look at it very carefully and see where the traction is and the configuration of the traction, and then go ahead for the surgery and try to stain the vitreous with IVTA and start inducing the PVD nasally and very gently. And then once you lift up the nasal side, you do a circumferential PVD induction like you do in diabetics when there is no no PVD. Then go towards the macula and don't peel off the macular PVD immediately. Go ahead and do a good vitrectomy over the fovea, over the macular region with a very low suction and high cut rate to remove any cut off any traction with the other part of the vitreous. Once you are reasonably sure that you have done that, then you can do a peel, stain the vitreous, complete the peripheral vitrectomy. Don't do the peripheral vitrectomy before, because that causes undue traction at the posterior pole. And then you might end up with, you might even not know, you might be doing peripheral vitrectomy. When you come to the macula, there might be a macular hole there. So follow this and then stain, and always do a ILM peel. That's what I do. And if ERM is there, remove the ERM along with it. It is kind of a prophylaxis, as well as in case you end up with a hole, you can get away with it with a gas tamponade and a ILM peeling. So these are the few things which I follow.
Yeah, regarding ILM peeling, Dr. Dharmesh, what do you suggest? So do you suggest doing ILM peeling as a routine like Dr. Jaideep suggested, or you think just releasing the VMT or any other tip or trick?
The one point very clearly suggested is the trimming of the vitreous with very low suction over the fovea. It's a very important step by staining, and just not to have a undue pulling or like PVD induction kind of thing in VMT. And once we do, I try to do a dual kind of staining. So sometimes there is in VMT we might have ERM and ILM and both, and we are not able to peel both in a one go. So sometimes I do a dual staining and then peeling, and it's really help. As I say, if we have created by mistake also iatrogenic small holes can be closed, but the trimming and peeling around that foveal region is very important in VMT vitrectomies. I have a question for all the panelists. Is a patient with the full thickness macular hole with grade 3, grade 4 nuclear sclerosis, so cataract with a macular hole, what Amol or Vikram or Anirudh, what you do? First you advise cataract, then macular hole, or you do macular hole first and then cataract?
Yeah, I usually prefer doing combined procedure. Yeah, Amol.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I think combined procedure would be the ideal thing to do because you can always do that in a single setup, and the results, you need not wait for any of the problem to progress.
Yeah,
that's
Dr.
great.
Yeah, regarding the last thing, what VMT things we were saying, there's a small thing for the neo vitreoretinal surgeons that while staining with IVT or IRM, please basically use a 1cc syringe because that's more guarded. In my early days, I had used 2cc syringe, and while coming out, I had a big retinal break because it gushes the fluid very fast. So it's better to use a 1cc tuberculin syringe to stain. It's very guarded, very easy. And regarding the macular, yes, I do a combined thing.
Also, Vikram, do you use any specific stain for epiretinal membranes? Yeah, Dr. Dharmesh also after this about this.
It's basically a negative staining, but it's brilliant blue and then do a negative.
Yeah, I prefer triamcinolone. So it usually helps for the PVD induction also and the ERM removal, and then using the brilliant blue dye for the ILM peeling. Amol, your view on the staining?
Yeah, no, I prefer while doing vitrectomy and PVD, I prefer triamcinolone as well. And for the, of course, for the if you are going for the macular surgery, brilliant blue for the ILM.
Yeah, Jaideep, what do you use it for?
I think we all agree on that. So I also use the IVTA for PVD induction with for vitrectomy, and then brilliant blue and negative staining for ERM, and it stains the surrounding ILM, and it's pretty good to safe to use it. I don't think we use ICG anymore.
ICG is being not used, but I feel like in myopia, especially when there is a liquefied vitreous or there is a many layer of vitreous, the triamcinolone staining is really helpful in high myopic patients.
If I can share one tip of we were discussing about the surgery of the vitromacular traction in mostly of the V-shaped configurations. Here, one trick I do is in high magnification, I try to open up the PVD around the macular hole because it's already present there, right? So if you can segregate the fovea and do the dissection around and then lift the PVD at the disc, it would not harm the fovea and cause any de-roofing. So if you can, it's a tricky thing because the space is small, but maybe using a small pick or MVR blade. And now that we are doing it with 25 gauge needles, the induction and further surgery becomes more easier. So this is just a trick to prevent the de-roofing of the.
I think our time is over now. It's a really great thing. There is just one question, one suggestion which just came. Thanks for the suggestion, but we are now out of time. So thanks MOS and thanks all the faculty to give your valuable time and share your knowledge. Let's hope it was worth our efforts. Thank you everyone, and let's.
Thank you, Anirudh.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.